We can now bring in Dr. Luke Blaxill, historian of modern British politics and monarchy. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program today. This is the first royal state visit to France post-Brexit. What message will King Charles III aim to send?
Well, I think he'll be aiming to send a very diplomatic kind of message. I don't think he'll be talking about hard diplomacy. He'll leave that to Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister. But I think he'll be trying to project a modern kind of image and also a historic kind of image, really very similar to what I think Emmanuel Macron will also want out of it.
He's set to hold talks with Emmanuel Macron at the Élysée Palace this afternoon. How can politics remain out of those discussions, or do they actually creep in?
I think they inevitably will creep in. Charles is supposed to be a symbol of political neutrality. He's not affiliated to any of the UK political parties. Obviously, Macron has his own independent political mandate. But I think that both men will be very minded of the symbol of the occasion. That obviously Charles will be viewing a number of very historic French monuments like the Arc de Triomphe and having a meal in the Hall of Mirrors in the Palace of Versailles. And there will be that very magical symbolism that brings together two nations that have had very strong monarchical histories, but of course went very different ways in history. And so I think it will be the symbolism, on one part modern, on one part historic, that will be the item that both men will really want to come out with after this visit is over.
Now, the king will be addressing the French Senate tomorrow morning. What themes are likely to make their way into that speech?
Well, the first thing, the king is expected to address the French Senate in French, so the French people will get to assess Charles's language skills. I think he's likely to keep the address on relatively bland themes. He will speak of the environment, he will speak of youth entrepreneurship, he will speak of some of the historic links between the two countries, and I expect him to make a large number of callbacks to his late mother, a figure, of course, that the French public were intimately acquainted with, and just like the British public, came to stand for really a figure of reconstruction in the post-war age. So I think it's going to really be how he says it, as much as what he says, that's going to be most important.
You mentioned Charles's mother, because Queen Elizabeth II, we know, had a special relationship with France. She was fluent in the language. She loved visiting the country. What is Charles's relationship with France?
I think that Charles is also a Francophile. I think that the royal family in general, not just the late Queen Elizabeth, have a fascination with France. It's always been, the country that we look to, despite the British Empire, despite the United States of America. It's always our closest point of comparison. And I think that Charles, just like his mother, is also very interested in the history of France as well. Obviously, the countries took very different turns in respect to the monarchy. But I think he's also very aware of some of that kind of status. And, France, obviously, while it didn't become a constitutional monarchy in the end, it became a republic, found its way of dealing with its own history and representing its history to a new age. And Charles is drawing upon something quite a lot older, a 1,000-year institution, and of course one that didn't really have a revolution. And so I think France is a real fascinating point of historical comparison for the king, and I think the French people probably feel the same way about the British monarchy.
If you heard the report which we aired before coming to you, there are a lot of people in that report, especially, who said that they had a different view of the Queen Elizabeth II than they do King Charles III. What's it like there? Where you are?
I think that there is something of a feeling that Charles is not as well liked as his mother. I think your report featured a number of interviews from younger people who in Britain are certainly less likely to be monarchists in general and maybe more likely to be a little bit more sceptical of the new king. But generally, British royalists, I think, have been really pleased with the public reaction to Charles in his first year. Opinion polling puts support for the monarchy in Britain at about 62%. That's down a little bit from the time of Elizabeth, but there's not really been much of a surge of Republican sentiment. And while there is some scepticism amongst some younger people, I think that British royalists are fairly content with the position of the monarchy at the moment. There hasn't really been any groundswell of Republican feeling yet, and it doesn't really look as though that's likely unless there's some sort of major scandal.
Dr. Luke Blaxill, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.